Hello, I'm Ngaire McDiarmid from Mining Journal, and today I'm speaking with Bruce Lane, the Executive Director of GTI Resources, which is focused on its uranium projects in the US. Now, Bruce, you've recently completed the acquisition of your project in Wyoming's Great Divide Basin, and initial drilling's begun with some promising results that you've just announced. Can you elaborate on those?
Yeah, thanks, Ngaire. Look, we've gone through a process of acquiring these projects in Wyoming and raising in excess of $5 million, getting through the permitting and the settlement of the acquisition to get us to this point of drilling. We commenced last week, got 10 holes done before the end of the week. And of those 10 holes, 5 intersected mineralisation that we would consider to be pretty interesting. And that's a good hit rate for our first program. So we got a hole there with a grade thickness of 1.92 and another one with a grade thickness of 1.74. So the significance of that is that economic ISR mineralization cutoffs are around a grade thickness of 0.2 and quoted resources of 0.4. So we're getting well in excess of that from a grade thickness calculation point of view. So we're very, very encouraged by that. We're also very encouraged that the mineralisation appears to be located well below the water table. So, about 100 foot below, which means from an in situ recovery mining point of view, it puts us well below the water table and into an area geotechnically that we believe will make the uranium recoverable. So I think from a starting point of view, out of our first 10 holes, we're very encouraged by what we've seen. It's bang on what we were looking for.
Well, as you mentioned, Bruce, you do have about $5 million that you've raised. So what are your plans for the coming months in terms of exploration?
Yes, we've, as I said, we've done 10 holes. We expect to complete around 100 holes in this first program. So the next few weeks, we'll continue on drilling right up to Christmas. The weather's been kind to us. It can get pretty cold at this time of the year in the desert in Wyoming. We'll probably take a break for Christmas, and then at some point in the new year, weather dependent, we'll complete the program. And from that, we'll obviously synthesize the results and then figure out what we do next. But it's likely that we'll continue on doing some more drilling at the Thor project in July if we find what we're looking for. And then we've got probably some step out work to do at the Loki and Odin projects, which are just to the north. So we'll continue drilling during next year. But obviously we want to see what the results are here at Thor, and that will determine exactly where we invest that money in the new year.
Well, a point of difference, Bruce, is that you've mentioned this drilling program is going to be carbon neutral. So can you elaborate on that and your broader ESG commitments? And in line with that, also what you see as the benefits of ISR mining?
Yes, we've been tracking our corporate, governance, performance against the World Economic Forum's 21 metrics that that published as it for ESG transparency for corporate governance globally. And so we've decided that that's really the best practice approach. Obviously, the ASX, there are some requirements for corporate governance reporting and policies, but we've gone well beyond that. And we'll report that. We've reported it at a baseline, and we'll report it as part of our annual report going forward, so that our stakeholders can see that there's an element of transparency around those 21 core metrics. And one of those is obviously, or some of those metrics are obviously very focused on environment. We've identified that obviously we will be emitting carbon as part of our drill program going forward, and we have been during the year with our other activities. So we've gone through a process of measuring that internally, and then the next step with measuring and reporting those carbon emissions is to become Climate Active certified. And so we've commenced that process sometime during 2022, possibly about halfway through. We'll achieve that certification, and that'll allow us to accurately report those emissions. And at that point, we'll then be able to offset those emissions either probably by retiring some carbon credits that we've acquired. So what we've done is speculatively acquired some carbon credits so that when we get to that point, we actually do have some ACCUs that we can retire to offset those emissions. So, the project that we're working on is obviously a uranium exploration project, and we think that the world has sort of come to its senses a little bit around nuclear power and understood that it's very, very safe and clean in general, but certainly it's from a carbon emissions point of view, it's critical. For the US in particular, I think nuclear power is about 20% of their baseload requirements. It's 50% of their clean energy. So to think that the US could meet its emissions targets without nuclear power is a bit fanciful. And in fact, I think that they've really woken up to the fact in recent times that they need more nuclear power if they're going to achieve those objectives. So as part of our sort of corporate governance activities, we've identified that particular initiative is something that we can do something about right now in terms of offset. And it fits well with our objective to generate some clean energy supply. And it also fits with the mining method for in situ recovery, which, for anyone who's got an awareness of uranium mining, obviously there's a lot of open pit uranium mining operations around the world, and whether it's in the middle of the Kakadu region National Park at Ranger, or whether it's in the middle of the Namibian desert with Langer Heinrich or Husab or Rossing, they're very big open pit mining operations. And if you compare that to the likes of Highland Smith Ranch in Wyoming, or the Beverley mine in South Australia, or Boss Energy's mine, the environmental footprint is tiny by comparison. It's a bore field and a water treatment plant. So we think that we've got a very clean way of extracting the mineral. It's a mineral that's going to contribute very, very positively to the emissions challenge, the net zero challenge. And we're just aligning our corporate governance with that story.
Bruce, you mentioned briefly earlier the growing demand for uranium and nuclear energy. You've described GTI as uniquely positioned to meet the US demand. Where do you see the demand headed?
I think there's plenty of published information that's showing this yawning gap between supply and demand for uranium in the world. Take, for example, the US, which obviously we're quite focused on. The US really doesn't generate any uranium domestically for its nuclear power business. The uranium mining and enrichment process, the enricher in the US is predominantly, enrichment in the US is predominantly run by Rosatron, which is Russian. And I think under President Trump, they went through a process to really analyze and understand the nuclear power and the nuclear energy supply chain, and they identified that the fact that they didn't have a domestic supply was of national importance to them, strategic importance to them, from a security point of view and from an economic point of view. So we want to be part of the resurgence in the domestic US uranium mining and processing business, and the US would much prefer to be acquiring domestic uranium than acquiring it from Kazakhstan. They do, of course, get some from Canada and Australia, but ultimately they've acknowledged that they'd be better off with a domestic industry. So we can see that starting to occur. There's some incentives being considered at the moment, in particular the Strategic Uranium Reserve, which is designed to spend about, I think it's $1.5 billion over 10 years to acquire uranium into a strategic reserve. And that will only happen if the acquisition price of that uranium is at the incentive price for production, which at the moment, we believe that the incentive price is probably closer to $70 than $50. And so we can see the spot price moving in that direction. And, we can see through the change in the dynamics in the uranium market with the emergence of the Sprott SPUT fund, that a lot of the uranium that was, I guess, spare inventory and traded inventory around the world is being soaked up. And so we're falling back to primary supply. And most of the uranium mines in the world have actually been idled or shut down in the Western world. So if you look at Canada and North America, there's really no uranium production at all. BHP's continued producing in South Australia, but that's because uranium was a byproduct at Olympic Dam. And Heathgate has continued to produce in South Australia, and it's a very low-cost ISR mine. But Boss Energy's idled. If you look at Wyoming, I don't think there's any producing ISR plants, and they're the lowest cost plants in production facilities outside Kazakhstan. And then, it tells you that there's no incentive for them to produce. And so that we believe that is going to turn the corner very soon, and that the mines will come back online, and they're doing that because the demand is escalating. And President Xi's recent announcement of 150 additional new nuclear reactors in China is just one data point in a cacophony of positive news for nuclear energy around the world.
Exciting times ahead, Bruce. Thank you very much for the update today.
Thanks, Ngaire. Thanks for your time.